Hey everybody, it's Emily at ARG Schooling, and this is going to be the start of a series that I'm going to be doing where I'm going to be reading recommendations from Sadie Hartman's book, 101 Horror Books to Read Before You Are Murdered. So buckle up, we're going to be reading some spooky books. So I am obsessed with this book. I love it so much. I love that she's giving me so many recommendations, and it's gotten me really excited to pick up some new horror. So what I thought I would do is sort of split this into a bunch of different videos where I'm going to choose a type of horror to read. This book is divided into categories. So like there's a section for slashers, for cults, for coming-of-age stories, for cosmic horror, and demons and exorcisms and whatnot. So there's a whole slew of different things. Plus there's like different authors to check out. Several author spotlights are in here. So there's just like a plethora of new things to read and try. So I decided to ask you guys on my Instagram what I should start with. And it was a very close race, but the winning category was apocalyptic and sci-fi horror, by like the slimmest of margins. So that's where we're gonna start. So basically what I'm doing is I read through all of her recommendations and I choose some that I think I'm going to enjoy. My goal is to have a book selection that I'm gonna like really enjoy. I don't want to just read for the sake of reading whatever. So I went through and I picked up some things to read. One of them was already on my TBR. Like I was already planning on reading this book. So it's definitely going to happen in this video, and that is Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. This is technically a dystopian, cli-fi kind of story. I don't really know exactly what this is. I've never really read the synopsis. I kind of want to go in blind. So I don't really know a lot about it. Sadie only mentioned this one in like a small, like if you want more. So she didn't give this its own spotlight page, which is fine, but I don't really know what it is. So I've only read one other Octavia Butler. I read Kindred a few years ago, loved it, and I've wanted more. I just didn't know where to go. So this is my next stop with Octavia Butler, and then she recommends a whole bunch of things, and I don't know what I'm going to love, but these two felt like good options, so I got these at the library. I have Paul Tremblay's Survivor Song. This is an author that I've read before, and I've really enjoyed what I've read, and I've been wanting to pick up more, so it just felt right that I would go with another Paul Tremblay. This one has to do with a pandemic and in the survivors in Massachusetts. I don't know more than that. Then I also decided to try out Zone 1 by Colson Whitehead. This again is a pandemic story. There's a lot of those in apocalyptic fiction, which I understand. It's a very like terrifying way to go, way for the world to end, and it would make sense having come off of the last few years. This feels pretty relevant. Honestly, both of these do. So this one I think might be a little more literary, but I feel like both of them are going to be really scary. I also have several ebooks on my Kindle. So I'm also going to be reading Ring Shout by P. Djeli Clark. This is an author and a book that I've heard mentioned frequently that I've been really curious about. It's a novella, so it's really short. All I can tell you is that it's a like alternate reality world where the Ku Klux Klan are demonic in some way, and so they're like killing these like racist demons. I think that's the gist of it, I believe. And it has to do with like African American horror in our world, but like with an added twist. I also have The Silence by Tim Levin, which I'm really curious about because This is kind of where the idea for The Quiet Place came from. And I love the movie The Quiet Place. I found it really interesting and original. And to my surprise, like I didn't realize there was a book that had come out, I think in like 2015, that is exactly the same premise, where it's these demon alien beings come to the earth and they attack sound. So like you're following a family who has a deaf daughter, and like the way they communicate with each other and that sort of thing, and survive this world. So I'm super curious about that, just because I want to know like how similar The Quiet Place is to that. And potentially I have it. I just don't know if I'm going to get to it. I have The Fearing by John F.D. Taff, and this is the one I know the least about. I did read what Sadie wrote about it. And it sounded intriguing. I believe this is a bind-up series. So The Fearing is it's a 4-book bind-up. So that's why I'm like, I don't know if I'll get to it or not in this video. I do still want to read it at some point. But this is a story in which the apocalyptic thing that happens is that everybody's worst fears like now come to life. Like, I guess they manifest. So that sounds horrible, and I'm really curious about like how that works in the story, like what happens. It's very character-driven horror, that kind of thing. So it has me really intrigued, but because I know it's a 4-book bind-up, I don't know how long that is or if I'll get to it. My goal is to read at least my 3 physical books that I have here, and then the 2 ebooks. So if I can get to all 5 of those in this video, I'm going to feel very pleased with myself. If I get to anything extra, that's awesome. So basically my plan here is this isn't going to necessarily be a reading vlog where like you follow me around while I'm doing stuff. This is going to be more like what we're doing right now. I'm going to, as I finish the books, I'll sit down and I'll film my response. Like, what did I think? Was it what I expected? My ratings, that sort of thing. So this is just the intro. I'm looking forward to my September being full of dystopian apocalyptic futures. So buckle up, guys. I'm excited. I hope you're excited. Let's see which books are my favorites. So I finished reading Ring Shout by P. Djeli Clark, and I loved it. I get the recommendation. I think this was really good. I really didn't know going in what to expect. I knew it was apocalyptic in some way. I knew that it was historical, but I didn't really know if I was going to love it. Mostly because it is a novella, and for me, most of the time, I feel like novellas always feel like they're missing something. Like, I need just like this much more to feel connected in the story. That was not the case. This was what I would consider a perfect novella. It had everything I could possibly want. There was great character work happening. Like the characters felt very rich, very real. Like there was growth. The plot moved at a really solid pace the whole time. I never felt like there was anything missing or like it was lagging. I felt like the story was so good. Like there was so much backstory, and like I can't even understand how you get so much backstory into a book that is under 200 pages. Like, I don't know that I've read anything like that before, where in just one fell swoop I get like an entire story like that. It felt very cinematic. There were moments that I almost felt like Clive Barker-ish. Like there was a little bit of like Pinhead in there in some moments. Like the way it was, I'm just gushing. This is a story set in the 1920s, and we're following Maris and her 2 best friends, and they are like monster hunters basically. But the monsters that they're hunting are Ku Kluxes. So in this like alternate reality world, we have these demons who have come and they feed on hate. And so they've infected the white population. And so everyone who joins the clan is at risk of becoming a Ku Klux eventually. And I'm not going to spoil anything. I don't want to give too much away, but like the way that this like otherworldliness happens in the story is so interesting and so intricate. There's so much historicalness to it. It was beautiful. It was really well done. The writing is spectacular. I really, really, really want to go and listen to the audiobook. I could not get myself a copy of it. I just like could not. I hate using my credits for shorter books because like the audiobook I think is only like 2 hours. And because I listen at double speed, I'm going to listen to the entire audiobook in probably an hour or less. So I just can never justify using a credit through Audible for a short book like that. And it wasn't available anywhere else. So I just had to live with the fact that I wouldn't get to hear the audiobook on my first read. But I've heard it's really well done. But also, just as a, like, not warning, but there is a lot of moments where you're hearing someone's, or you're reading somebody speaking in a Gullah dialect, which is somewhat unfamiliar to me. And I found that hard to, like, I almost said visualize. I'm not visualizing it. It was hard for me to like connect what that is supposed to sound like. So I'm sure it's written really well though for like a dialect. I just don't know what I'm supposed to hear when I read that, like what it should sound like. So I felt like that for me was a little bit of a disconnect, but that's just me. I'm not great with accents and things like that. So like if I'm reading a dialect, sometimes it doesn't make sense in my head. So I feel like I would really benefit from listening to the audiobook. So if that is an issue that you have, I would definitely recommend getting the audio. But the story itself is beautiful. I really loved the characters. I really loved how cinematic it felt. I felt like I was watching a movie in my head. I feel like as far as scariness goes, scare factor, I'm gonna struggle with this because I never know what other people might find scary. To me, this book was not scary. This felt more like an action movie, but I know like if this were made into a movie, it would probably be horrific. There was some body horror stuff in it. There is some gore, but none of it really felt overly gross to me. So like there's dismemberment, for example, but like it's not, I don't know. Your mileage may vary. For me, it didn't feel scary so much as just like really intense, somewhat disturbing. There are some moments that definitely made me squirm a little bit, like uncomfortable, but not necessarily scary. But there was definitely some scenes that I felt like really on the edge, like this could veer into scare factor. So like if I were to rate it as like how scary I felt it was, this would get like 3 out of 5. But like I really enjoyed it. This was a 5-star read for me. I absolutely need to read more of this author's work. I don't think I own anything else. I think Ring Shout is the first thing that I have purchased from P. Djeli Clark, but I am absolutely gonna have to read something else because the writing was so beautiful, like and lyrical. It flowed so well. Loved it so much. Definitely excited for more from that author. Now, I need to choose my next book. I went over my list and I think I'm gonna go ahead and read Parable of the Sower next because that has been on my TBR forever. It's been on my TBR the absolute longest time and I've just been like waiting for the right moment. So the moment is here. The moment has arrived. I am excited. So I'm going to start Parable of the Sower next and I don't know how it's going to compare. I don't know how scary it is. I feel like a lot of people have told me that it feels too real, which makes me feel anxious about it. I feel like even though it might feel realistic, I can still find the enjoyment factor in reading it. I enjoy that kind of story anyway. So I don't really actually know what Parable of the Sower is about. I go into books as blind as I can, especially when there are things like this, because I don't want anything to spoil me. But I am hype because this is an author that I've only read one book from. I've only read Kindred which I loved, and I keep saying I'm going to pick up something else. I think I own like 3 of Octavia Butler's books at this point, so I'm excited to see what I think of Parable of the Sower, and I will let you guys know my thoughts when I finish it. Okay, so ignore the absolute chaos of my surroundings. I'm in my daughter's room because I wanted somewhere quiet and where I could gather my thoughts. So I just finished reading The Parable of the Sower, and I have no idea how to talk about this book. I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. So this was sort of like not even a full recommendation in the book. It was more like if you like apocalyptic stories, here are a few more. And Sadie had listed The Parable of the Sower, and I knew I needed to read this book. It already had been on my to-read list for a very long time. It had been sitting on my shelf waiting for me. I knew I was going to read it this year. So I decided to add it to my stack for this video, and I'm so glad that I finally picked this up. But also, like, I feel like I'm going to be thinking about this book for forever, for years, because it felt too real. This story starts in 2024 and it goes through 2027, and we're following our main character Lauren for her teenage years, from the time she's like 15 till she's 18. And we see this world that she's living in that looks frighteningly like our world, only worse. And so, like, it's America. She lives in California. She's talking about how the world has, how the country has fallen apart. Societal collapse has happened. Climate change has gotten too bad, and it's impossible for people to find good work. Slavery is now a thing again, and like company towns and corporations have kind of taken over. It just, all of it feels too real. Like, it all feels frighteningly plausible. So in that vein, it felt kind of like reading The Handmaid's Tale, where like you're reading a story that feels like it could really happen. Like, this could in fact be our future. So that part of it was very disturbing and kind of alarming. And there are a lot of like awful things happening in this book. People are dying left and right. There's a lot of talk about rape. We don't actually see any rapes happen. I don't recall. I don't think so. It's never like on page. It's more like mentioning that it's happened or mentioning that it just happened, but you don't actually see it. So it's a lot, but it's not super graphic. There's a lot of talk about drug abuse. There's a lot of people being murdered. So Lauren lives in this gated community, and we know that there are some of these other communities around in the country, and like they're sort of protected, but not really. Because in this world, you can't be safe. Like, there is no such thing as a safe place, because no place is safe. There is danger around every corner. And so, like, that aspect of the story felt very disturbing. I don't know how I feel about calling this horror, because to me, this reads more like a dystopian story than necessarily horror specifically. So, in that vein, I do feel like this leans more in the dystopian realm. Like, I would put this on the same level as The Handmaid's Tale. So if you found that really disturbing, and that liken it to horror, you might think this is too. I don't know. But for me, this wasn't necessarily horror, but it was horrific. And one of the things that I did love, though, was that even though our main character is living through this like awful, horrendous time, she has like so much hope in her soul. Like, she's just such a hopeful person, but she's also incredibly realistic. And she has created this religion, and she calls it Earthseed. Now, she's a preacher's daughter. She's grown up Baptist, I think, and like her family compound that they live in is basically a church. And so she's brought up in a very religious home, but she doesn't believe in any of it. And from a young age, she starts like compiling these kind of like poems, and each chapter starts with them. So like, we are Earthseed, the life that perceives itself changing. The destiny of Earthseed is to take root among the stars. So she talks a lot about God is change. God is change is basically the essence of Earthseed. And I just found all of that to be fascinating and beautiful. Something that I find just endlessly interesting is religion and like the formation of religion and how we come to believe the things that we believe and faith and all of that kind of stuff. I find it really interesting. I know the Earthseed thing made me think a lot about the religion that Neil Shusterman created in The Ark of the Scythe, where you see over the course of the final book kind of like how a religion forms and is created and how a person becomes deified and that sort of thing. And I thought that was like so fascinating. So it was really interesting reading this book and kind of seeing how Lauren will probably become deified at some point through her religion she's creating. So she's got this idea for a religion. She really believes that it will help people. She wants nothing more than to help, to make people better, to make the world better. And she thinks that Earthseed is the way to do it. So she wants to leave the compound and go out and like spread this message. And so we see that over the course of the story, her like kind of trying to bring people in to Earthseed, which I just thought was really interesting. Also, another thing that I thought was like really cool in the story is that she has hyper empathy, which is talked of as kind of like this disorder that she was born with, where she feels other people's pain and pleasure. And like the idea of that is kind of horrific if you really think about like what that would do to you. But also, like, wouldn't it be great, and I think they even say it in the book, wouldn't it be great if other people also had this and we could all feel each other's pain? Maybe we'd be better. And like, yes, so much better. Like, we wouldn't be so quick to violence as a species, I think, if it was going to be inflicted right back upon us. And so like that I thought was a really interesting, I think that's probably the most sci-fi element of this story, because I see this listed as a science fiction, and I wanted to read it because it's cli-fi, climate science fiction, and I needed a book for that for my reading challenge this year. And like, yes, the climate stuff, sure, yeah, but I never felt like this was that science fiction. There didn't feel like a lot of sci-fi elements to it. Like I said, it's more dystopian in that it's a societal collapse. It's seeing like all the damage done to the world because of our ignorance and our like humanity, I guess, just being people. But I really loved this. I loved the writing. It was absolutely beautiful. I'm so glad I picked it up. I definitely want to read more. I absolutely must finish this. It's a duology. The next book is called Parable of the Talents, and I really want to know what happens. I feel like I need to know. So that's definitely on my horizon. So anyway, I loved this. I gave it 5 stars. I think it's absolutely worth picking up. Would I call it horror? No, but it is definitely disturbing and horrific. So I think I'm going to try to fit one more book in because I really wanted to read a bunch of things. So I'm going to try to read maybe 2 more, but we'll see how long it takes me to get through. But this is a library book, so I really need to pick up Survivor Song so I can take it back to the library. This is by Paul Tremblay. So this is going to be where I go next. I don't really know more than that this is set in Massachusetts and there is some kind of a pandemic situation, a infectious disease, and we're following the survivors of this disease. I don't know what more to tell you because I don't know anything yet. I really didn't want to read the whole synopsis. So I'm kind of going in a little bit blind, but it's Paul Tremblay, so I'm hoping that I love it. I've read 2 of his books so far, loved both of them. Really hoping that this one works for me too. So I'm going to read this next, and I will come back and let you guys know my thoughts once I finish it. So I just finished reading Survivor Song by Paul Tremblay, and I mean, I have yet to be disappointed in one of his books. He's great. So this is also my third Paul Tremblay. So I've only read 3, but like, he's 3 for 3, so we're doing good. I thoroughly enjoyed myself reading this. Like, I flew through this book because I could not stop. It was so fast-paced. It was non-stop. Like, I've read books where there's like a lot of action. I'm trying to think if there was something else that I've read like this where it was just like non-stop. Like, you hit the gas from the very like beginning of the book and it just does not let up. So this is another apocalypse story, obviously. That is what we're reading right now. But this one is more of a like small apocalypse because it's not like the whole world. It's not like everywhere. It's just in New England. And like, we're only looking in the Boston area, but I mean, I think they're trying to say that this was happening all over New England, where there's this new weird strain of rabies. And it's highly contagious if you get bit by something. And a lot of the animals are succumbing. And so if you get bit, you then become rabid. And like, it hits super fast. Like, within an hour of getting bit, you become rabid, and then you attack somebody, you bite them, they then become, like, it's a chain reaction kind of a situation. And so like, right as we start the book, we meet our protagonist Natalie, who is very pregnant, like about to give birth, pregnant, and she's waiting for her husband to get back with the groceries. He is like been waiting at the store for hours to get in because it's chaos out there. No one's supposed to be out and about, but of course everybody is trying to get food and supplies and whatnot. And as soon as he gets back, all hell breaks loose. So we're following a pregnant woman. So I just was not anticipating how emotional this book was going to be. Like, it's sad. This is a story about a pregnant woman who is looking down the barrel of a gun, expecting that she's not going to make it, and trying to figure out what to do. We're also following her best friend, Ramala, or she's called Ram. She's a doctor, and she's trying to help her friend and help her deliver her baby and get like, it's just non-stop action the whole way through. I don't want to tell you anymore because I feel like I might spoil it, and I don't want to spoil this book because it's really definitely worth your time. If you enjoy apocalypse stories, if you like a story that's scary but also emotional and has a lot of like just tenderness to it, it's hard to like explain why that this is like a emotional roller coaster kind of a book. But I loved it. Thought this was great. Highly recommend. Paul Tremblay, new favorite author. Definitely need to read everything this man has ever written forever. So that was fantastic. Like, I don't have much more to say. It's a pretty straightforward story too. So like, it happens. So I think at this point, I really only have time for one more book, because we're approaching the end of the month, and I wanted this to be my September reading. I don't want to bleed into October. And so I only have more time for like one more book. So I think for my last book in the apocalyptic sci-fi horror genre, I'm going to read The Fearing by John F.D. Taft. Of the books that were recommended, this was the one I was the most intrigued by. It is a story about an apocalypse where, if I'm understanding this correctly, all of your fears, the thing you fear the most, becomes a reality in front of you, I think. I don't know what causes that to happen, but that sounds really crazy and very scary, and I'm super intrigued. So I have access to the audiobook and the ebook, so I'm probably gonna like bounce back and forth. I did listen to the audiobook for this quite a lot. Like, I had this on almost all day today because I was listening while I was like doing chores and getting other things done. So like, I kept popping back and forth. The audiobook to this was very good. Highly recommend. I haven't listened. I don't know anything about The Fearing yet. I don't know if I'm going to like the audio, but I'm going to give it a shot and I will see what I think. I'm hoping that I like it because I've never heard of anything. I've never read anything by this author. I don't know anything about them. But that book sounds really intriguing, The Fearing. So, gonna give it a shot. Okay, so last night I finished reading The Fearing by John F.D. Taft, and I really liked it. There were some elements that didn't quite work for me, but overall I thought it was really good. I gave it a 4.25 stars. So basically, this is very much in line with The Stand. If you're familiar with that story, this is very similar. It's this apocalyptic event where everyone's fears start to become like real and they start happening in real life, and there's only a handful of survivors left on the planet and they are trying to save themselves. It's a survival story and you're following lots of different people, so you're getting a big perspective, but like they all come together in the end. So it's kind of similar in the way The Stand is set up, in that, you know, you start out with everyone spread apart and they all start to come together and the story starts to like make more and more sense as you go along. You start to find out like why this has happened and what's going on and all of that. And overall, like, this is very much the kind of thing that I enjoy, having been like basically raised by Stephen King. Like, this is very similar in storytelling, in writing style, so like it felt familiar, but in a good way. It was still like, it's not a copycat of The Stand. It's very like unique in what it's doing and the way it's doing it. I did not love the end. I felt it was a little bit weird. I don't know, the end didn't quite work for me, which is why I couldn't go 5 stars. Like, most of the way through though, I was completely invested in what was going on. I really thoroughly enjoyed how everything was happening. I thought the characters were really interesting and dynamic. It felt really cool the way the fear thing worked. There were several moments where I was like holding the book back as far as possible while I was reading because I just felt so uncomfortable by what was happening. It didn't happen a lot, but there were a handful of moments where I was like, oh no, I don't like that. Not that I didn't like the story, but just like what was the fear that was happening was very upsetting and like disturbing to read. Like, I didn't like it. But overall, I enjoyed it. So, let's kind of recap. I went to go get my books and realized I don't have them because everything I read was an ebook except for Parable of the Sower. Let's recap what I read and I'll kind of like talk about my thoughts overall. Okay, so I read 4 apocalyptic sci-fi horror novels that were recommended by Sadie Hartman, and overall, I enjoyed them. Kind of like the experiment I'm doing here is like, what kind of horror do I really love? Like, what's my genre of horror? Because I haven't read a lot. I haven't read as much as I think I should have read to call myself a horror fan, but I'm getting there. And I wanted to like do this as a sort of experiment and see like, okay, is this the thing that I really like? And I knew going in, I like apocalyptic stories. Like, that's something I've already known that I enjoyed. So I ended up really liking all of the ones that I read. Yeah, so I read Ring Shout by P. Jelly Clark and loved that. That was fantastic. Like, such a good and different kind of apocalypse story. I thought it brought something really unique to the table. It didn't feel like the same kind of thing over and over, so I really enjoyed that. And that I gave 5 stars. I really loved Survivor Song by Paul Tremblay. Was it unique? Not really. It's kind of another like sort of zombie type story. So in that, in its essence, it's the same thing that's been done before, but I felt like he did bring something new to it. It was definitely a very emotional story. I felt very invested in what was going to happen to the main characters. I felt the pace was super fast, which is perfect for that kind of story. You don't want to feel like it's too slow or too bogged down. So I thought the pacing was really good. Really enjoyed that. That was also a 5 star. Then I read Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. And while this was definitely a slower, more introspective read, I really enjoyed the story. I really found the whole like building of a religion to be really fascinating. I really love the writing. Like Octavia Butler's writing is just perfection. So I really loved the writing style. I loved the characters. I thought this book was phenomenal. I need to read the sequel. Like I have to know how this ends. So that's definitely on my list of like, I have to read that soon. This was so good. So I gave this 5 stars. And then The Fearing I gave 4 stars. So that was my lowest rating. But honestly, it was still like a really great story. I'm super glad I've read it. That's why I'm doing this. I want to try new things and see what jumps out at me. What books do I need to like add to my list of favorites? So overall, yes, I do like apocalyptic sci-fi fiction, but I knew that. I already knew that going in, but like now I've read more in that genre, so I don't know. I'm enjoying this experiment though. I'm excited to see what other horror just becomes a new favorite for me. So of these books that I've read in this video, I think my favorite is probably Parable of the Sower. I think this was like top-notch, best in the apocalyptic horror genre. Just in the fact that, like, I don't know, she seems to be prophetic in her predictions of what the future is going to look like. Some of it felt a little bit too real to be considered fiction. Some of it was just really fascinating. Like I said, the building of a religion and the way the religion is presented was really interesting as well. So that whole thing really just, I love that. But also, this book just feels so horrific. And the way it's just kind of almost mundane and like, oh yeah, that terrible thing happened again today. And it's just become so ordinary. I think that's what makes it so horrific. But loved it. So that was my favorite of the apocalyptic books I read this month. I'm excited to continue on this journey and reading more horror fiction. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know down below what your favorite apocalyptic sci-fi horror is. Like what is your favorite book in that genre? I would love to hear it. I probably will add it to my TBR if I haven't already read it. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you guys in my next video. Happy reading. Bye.